Okay, guys, how we doing? Just Juicy here, Trent, with our webinar of the month, and we're going to look into dysfunction. So we're looking to understand dysfunction and hopefully giving you a sort of platform where you don't have to sort of see us all the time. You can be able to sort of diagnose it yourself and understand how to get better. Okay, so let me introduce Gav from Frontline Screening. You all probably know who he is by now. So he's with us on the call, and we're just going to go through it. We're both going to jump in and hopefully give you a good understanding of it. And also, any questions you got at the end, just hit us with it, and we'll leave you with a decent presentation, hopefully. So, Gav, how are we doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Juicy. Good, good.
Good. Okay, let's crack on then. So, what is dysfunction? You've probably heard us sort of band it around quite a lot lately, and for me, it's the big area I've looked into probably for the last 8 years. I think since I did a course back in 2008, or was it 2009, somewhere around then. Um, and it's such a huge aspect because I've been doing. Obviously, I'm in 18 seasons now. I've done this, and we've been strength training people, but they were still breaking down. And I was thinking, right, there's got to be something else. Got to be something else that we can be looking at and helping to get these players back. So went down a dysfunction route, but now it's sort of become a fairly common term that's banded around. I know, Gav, you've probably heard it sort of talked about a lot as well, haven't you?
Yeah, yeah. It's I think like anything, it's something that we all kind of hear, but again, when it comes to understanding it's such a broad term nowadays. But for a number of different reasons, it's good to get a hold on it because it's where everything starts and where everything moves on from.
Yeah, definitely.
Um,
But you know, what actually is it, Gav? From your point of view, obviously you're an FMS specialist. What would you say dysfunction actually is?
well, I mean, if we think about how the body was designed to work, so there's a phrase called regional interdependence, where if you take the sole of your foot to the top of your head, everything is designed for a job, whether it's mobility or stability. And the whole model comprises of a joint by joint basis. So mobile joint followed by stable, et cetera, all up through the kinetic chain. And dysfunction when it comes to the muscular skeletal system will mean that quite often that something in that kinetic chain is out of place. So therefore, you then have a stable joint that now has become mobile and a mobile joint that's become stable. So it becomes like a concertina effect all the way up the line. The thing that's quite genius about the human body is it's built to adapt and to compensate. We don't want it compensating that much, but unfortunately, due to lifestyle, etc., what we see is that the body just designs its own processes to basically do the work that other parts are designed to do. So from a musculoskeletal point of view, that would be how I would describe dysfunction.
Mm.
However, dysfunction goes all the way through the system, from breathing mechanics to musculoskeletal to just human performance.
Yeah,
But that would be a generic starting point on it.
yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, dysfunction is basically something's not working how it should, you know. And when we've got that, the worst thing we can ever do with a dysfunction is load it, whether it be loading, running with weights, or just bowling. We need to make sure we're getting it right. So, how does it affect you? Massively. Okay. Gav will touch on it in a sec, but for me, the spate of stress fractures is all about dysfunction in one form or the other, whether it's to do with the body or the action. Something's not right, which is resulting in this stress fracture. Because our bones aren't meant to be stress fractured. I think there's a fact that only three forms of mammals get stress fractures: humans, dogs, and horses. And dogs and horses only when they're being run by humans. So, you know, for the epidemic of stress fractures in cricket, it's absolutely crazy. I know, Gav, you've seen quite a few as well with the youngsters you've been screening.
Yeah, I think that with 15 years ago, plus the ECB brought the regulations in for bowling limitations. They did the same in baseball, um, and ultimately, what we've seen happen is injury has gone through the roof. We learned a bit more when it came to the science on what was going on. Exactly the same studies happened in baseball. They looked at pitching, they looked at mechanics, they dealt with that, but still kids were breaking down. You know, Tommy John surgery in America now is through the roof. Every sport has their epidemic. Female football players around the world, ACL epidemics, bowlers, stress fractures. You know, we've got to come at this from a different point of view. That, you know, we'll do the normal human thing. We'll stare at the action. We'll break it down. We'll make it safe, and still people will break with a good, mechanically sound action. So, for me, that this goes further afield. It goes down to lifestyle changes, nutrition, diet, and the last 20, 30 years of just becoming less human in how we move and how we coordinate our bodies, basically.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy. And what do you need to do about it? Hopefully, we'll cover some of that in this webinar. But it's a massive topic. It really is. So, what does dysfunction look like? Here's a few just stills of some of the movements we do to assess dysfunction. And this is definitely what it looks like. So if you're doing pretty much an unloaded overhead squat here, so just having a broom handle, and if you look how he's collapsing here, I mean, his right leg's all over the show, all over the show. But the interesting thing is you probably look at it and think, right, well, we know where he's going to get injured there. Look at how his ankle's coming in and his knees all over the shot, his hips drops, that right side. That left side is almost where we need to look at more, because that's probably taking 70% of all the weight going through it. So it's not just looking at one side and thinking, okay, well, that's a dysfunction. You've got to look at both sides, haven't you, Gav?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, you know, a lot of people might challenge it and go, well, I don't have an overhead squat in my training program, but, you know, an overhead squat is a pattern of movement that a 4-year-old can do. It is a test of mobility, stability, and motor control throughout the entire kinetic chain. So, yeah, you may not need it in your thing or your sport, but as a diagnostic tool, it just gives us a good overview of what is going on.
I haven't prescribed an overhead squat for probably over 10 years. But yeah, like Gav said, it gives us a great indication of where we've got a bit of an issue. And all three pictures here, there's issues. The first one on the left there is not a massive issue, just probably got a little bit of a thoracic extension problem. But if you look in the middle one, you can see how he's struggling just to get down in that position. So as soon as we see that, that's a red light. Okay, we need to look into this and exactly what's going on. So here's another sort of common one we see, and Gav, you're going to touch on this, I know, because you see it so much with cricketers, the shoulder mobility test. So the reason we're doing all this is for you guys, when you're at home and you came to the Build the Fast Bowler Day, or you've done an online screening, and you want to know, or sort of check in really to see if you're on track or if you're improving. Just get pictures like this. We'll show you everything. We've got two different players here, one spinner, one keeper, and you can see the differences in their shoulder mobility from left to right. So, Gav, I know you love to touch on the shoulders and dive in.
Yeah. I think when something's called a shoulder mobility test, when you mention that terminology in front of a physiotherapist, they automatically go into range of motion, etc. Now, one thing that's quite clear to understand, and I'll put this out in simplistic terms, is that if you're a right-handed thrower or a bowler and you've thrown from an early age, your right shoulder will be built differently. Simple as that. So people automatically will challenge this, saying that right and left shouldn't be symmetrical. Now, I do agree with that from a glenohumeral joint point of view. You're going to have what's known as a retroverted shoulder, which is more layback in baseball terms. It's just from a broad perspective of shoulders. When we measure it in degrees, we're looking for 150 degrees of total range of motion. Now, on a throwing arm, that could be 110 external, 40 internal. On a non-throwing arm, 90, 60, and it would be fine for range of motion. But this is showing us the relationship between the scapula and the T-spine, cervical, and also upper and lower extremity. It's a pattern of movement we're looking at here. So whereas on the right-hand side picture here, we'll see the right arm that we're looking at over the top is definitely going to be closer than when the left. But if you actually measured this and stripped out the parts, you would see a significant asymmetry. And again, breathing mechanics are massive here. So when we watch, the first thing you watch somebody do when they take their arm over their head, when you watch a child do this, for example, they will extend their T-spine. Now that thoracic extension gives me an idea of how well the rib cage is going to move effectively and how well we're going to move air through the lungs exceptionally and through the T-spine itself. So I am looking for a reasonable amount of symmetry on our scoring system that we use here. We're not measuring it in degrees of range of motion. But if you can do this on your throwing arm, and automatically, if you try this afterwards, if you're a right-handed bowler or a thrower, and you go and do this, you will automatically default to doing your right arm over the top first. The brain will take you where there is a path of least resistance. And most of the guys doing this will find when they take the left arm overhead, it's a little bit of a struggle. And that's not just on the shoulder capsule. This is rib cage, scapula, cervical. So it's an upper quarter mobility test. And I'm seeing huge differences here because over a period of time, the body will buffer movement. You know, you'll throw a ball, bowl a ball 15, 20 years, and it will do the best it can. It's incredible how it does it. But at some point, things are going to start to break down, and that level of asymmetry is going to get too far apart. So I have no issues, upper half, if there is a minor amount on the scoring system of an asymmetry. But once we get to that, where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, and our tracking is so far off, then we know that a significant asymmetry is one of the top indicators of an injury prediction.
So that's what we're showing you here. If you take your pictures and they're very far apart, then that's what we're calling asymmetry. If your fingers both touch on both, not so much of an issue. But it's a very good way here, taking the pictures, bang, have a look at it. It's instant feedback to see, A, if you've got an asymmetry, or B, if you're actually moving on and putting it right.
I think it's key to get this point across that it could be cervical, it could be the glenohumeral joint, it could be T-spine, or it could be scapular, or it could even be down to core function. So this isn't the case that just do this and my shoulder's in trouble. So there will be an underlying reason why you can't get in this position. And that's the same thing with dysfunction. It's just because we're all staring at the same thing, it doesn't mean that it isn't a number of different parts that lead to that level of dysfunction.
Yeah. So let's move on, and we're going to sort of change the way we look at it, basically. And like Gav's touched on a couple of times there, we're looking at movement, not parts. So the whole movement is what we want to improve. We're not just isolating. There is going to be times when we need to isolate something, okay? If you have got a strength issue, one side to the other, and then we want to isolate and get that side up to the same strength, so left to right. And that's fine, okay? But overall, we want to be getting movements right. So, Gav, again, you know, you're such a big proponent of movements, not parts.
Yeah, massively. Well, we've got to work out whether it's a hardware or a software problem. So a hardware problem is, do I have an issue with the parts, joints, mobility, stability? Software problem is just simply, do I have a motor control problem? Can I just not do it? And that's where understanding, I can take somebody who is limited in ankle dorsiflexion, I can work on their range of motion, soft tissue, gastroc soleus, talus, front, joint mobility, and we cannot change that ankle range of motion in a squat for a long period of time because they've just lost their squat pattern. So in a 10-minute reset, from a nervous system point of view, I can get you squatting correctly. Whereas if you go in for the ankle straight away and you start playing around with it, you can be there chasing ghosts all day long. So there's hardware versus software. A screen, a purpose of a screen is to attempt to understand a little bit what's going on with the software. An assessment will break out all of the parts and the pieces so we can understand whether it is more than just a programming issue.
Yeah, and I would say it's looking for what is the actual issue. Two people could have just say shoulder mobility dysfunction, which we just talked about, for completely different reasons. Completely different reasons. One could be down to their breathing. One could be down to the scapula or the way the glenohumeral joint is moving. So that's where we take it down, and where the screening really comes into its own is finding the actual issue. So when you've got a problem, always good to look above and below it. If you've got an issue, any sort of injury, and you've gone to a physio and they're just treating that area and they've not looked at anything else in your first session, get up, leave, say no thank you, because they're just going to keep you coming back and coming back and coming back. If you imagine a big dam keeping back water, and then for some reason there's just been a little crack in it. They're just trying to put a little plaster over this crack. They're not looking for why that crack's there. They just put a little plaster over it, and of course it's going to keep going. It's going to keep going. So you're going to go back and back and back, feel a little bit better from what they're doing, because soft tissue work and things like that will make you feel better and give you a little bit of light relief to start. But it's going to keep breaking down. And I gather you see this all the time with physios and things, and with people telling you about injuries, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, I went to the physio and they did this." And we had an incident the other week where the physio, what did they describe for the ankle? Something ridiculous, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this guy. I mean, it's not a case of just bagging all the physios out there. The problem is they get an hour with you and they've got to treat the chemical pain. You've gone there because you're in pain, so they've got to deal with that. The biggest issue in musculoskeletal health, as far as I'm concerned, is there's no standard operating procedure. Nobody is following the gold star assessment of the body to understand where all these problems lie. If we had done that over the last 20, 30 years, we'd start to be able to prioritize, categorize, and understand trends. And that's the issue where it comes to it. There have been lots of other industries that have adopted these procedures. Aviation was one, with all the issues back in the 60s and 70s. Well, now every single flight that leaves the country, the pilot has to go through a boring checklist and tick everything off. And that's our main issue, is because we're not all working off the same page, we're not all procuring the same data, and we're not all then able to predict more and help with more. So that for me is the biggest part, is that assessment is key, because there are sort of three things that make a good health practitioner. One is a good bedside manner, communication skills. Two is good diagnostics. And three is good treatment skills. Now, you can kind of get away with having a poor bedside manner if your diagnostics are good and your treatment skills are good. But if your diagnostics are off, you can have the best bedside manner and the best treatment, but you'll always be treating the wrong thing. And that's what happens.
And
it's as simple as that.
We've seen plenty of people in the industry like that, who with their bedside manner have somehow got a long career, when the other two, they don't know what they're doing.
No, diagnostics are massive. I mean, if you think about it logically, if you're going to take your car to the garage, they're going to have a look under the hood. If you're going to go and see a physiotherapist in this next few weeks, and you've got an hour session booked, and they go over an assessment and a whole process that takes 5 minutes, and they're treating you, then that's not really going to give them what we need or what you need to start underlying and picking out what the causes of the symptoms are. So, for me, that initial assessment is just hugely important. And then also checking back in with it. We can have plans where we've got people following their dysfunction now, and they go and get into their training programs. But for whatever reason, they might, I don't know, for example, say someone gets ill for 2 weeks and they're in bed. Well, as soon as you lie in bed for 2 weeks, you're going to have all different things going on in your body. Different issues will arise, and then you need to get rechecked back in. So I'm a big proponent of screening before training, and screening at regular intervals to understand, just look, what does my body need this month? Where am I? And how am I going to make sure that I get the best out of it, so that I don't ask my body to continually compensate all the time to get me through that next strength session, that next bowling spell, next whatever it may be.
Definitely. So when we're assessing, another very simple thing we do is just take pictures. Okay, so we take videos and pictures, and they can tell us a lot. So we got Cub here, who's one of my batters, and you can see, you look left to right and you think, right, I know nothing there is glaringly obvious there's an issue. Left to right looks fine, spine looks straight, you look at his hips and his chest, fine, feet, brilliant, no issues. Okay, so the pictures tell us a lot. Now we've got some videos. Gav, do you want to talk through some of these videos, the FMS testing?
Yeah. So we run through the FMS testing. We've got different screens and assessments. This is the standard functional movement screen that we do, which is 7 movement patterns. This is the hurdle step. So it's one of the first 3 patterns that we check. Effectively, we're asking somebody, so that you'll see the red cord across the 2 posts. That is set at the bottom of the knee. That's the tibial tuberosity, effectively responsive for stride length, gait, etc. Now, what we're looking at here is the leg that's traveling over. We're looking at the ankle, knee, hip staying in line. So can we achieve a certain amount of flexion of the moving hip versus the static hip? Are we able to, as we extend over the red line, can we gain enough hip extension through that static standing leg, which is the left? From sideways on here, what we're looking for is very little lumbo sort of pelvic movement. So as he steps over, the normal, or what we would require for hip extension, is around about 10 degrees.
Yeah.
When you see someone step over this, what ends up happening, if they don't have the range of motion, they'll take it from somewhere else, the next segment, which will be the lumbar spine, which is just the biggest thing going on, guys. I can't stress this enough. The human body is only built to survive, not thrive. It will take the path of least resistance. It will do whatever it needs to do to get the job done. It doesn't rely on movement quality, so it will ditch quality for quantity time and time again. And in all of these movements here on the right hand side, this next test is the inline lunge. You'll see the lad, his left ankle is going up. The left ankle is supposed to stay down here. He just can't simply remain with an upright torso, touch the knee to the board until he lifts the left ankle up. Now, that doesn't mean he's got a left ankle dorsiflexion problem. It just means in symmetrical stance, something there is not working. It could be T-spine, could be hips, could be ankle. So we would have to assess further from there on in.
And this is why we put things together, because you can do sort of a practice where, and we do it, you take dorsiflexion range and hip internal rotation range and thoracic range, things like that, which are all brilliant, but only when you put them together with looking at movements. Because in isolation, they could tell you a story that's not actually there.
Oh, hugely. I mean, at the end of the day, if there's this thing called reciprocal inhibition, there is this incredible piece of kit that's our nervous system that is designed to keep us safe. It's not going to allow you to move into a range of motion that it can't keep you safe in. It will just simply not do it. Your brain and your nervous system has the foot on the gas. It can either choose to add power into a muscle or take it away from you, and that is called inhibition. So if you understand the importance of getting this right now, then you'll understand how we can actually free you up to do what you were designed to do: move well, bowl well, play whatever sport you want to play. But if you bring dysfunction to the training room, to your bowling action or anything else, the brain will always override you. You're not going to be in control of what you think you're going to do.
So moving on, this is an overhead squat. We saw pictures earlier, but this is ideally, if your overhead squat looks like this, we know there's not going to be a hell of a lot of issues because everything is fairly well moving well there. Okay, so that's a good one to almost put yourself up against. Shoulder mobility here is the guy we saw earlier, and this is actually just a video of him struggling to get in these positions, especially at that side. He's got his head tilted forward. He's just trying to get any sort of range he can to get there, and just can't do it.
And this is why then you take a player like that on training them overhead, push pressing. Whenever I have a conversation with somebody who has that kind of asymmetry, they always say, why is it when I bench press, the right hand side of the bar goes up quicker than the left? But then they want to still carry on bench pressing. They'll say the same thing. Why is it when I do a press up, my right side just seems to pop up more than my left? And that's the whole point. These screens are there as a vital tool for programming. So we're not going to now go and symmetrically load a bar and put it on an asymmetry and expect him to come out with anything that's going to help his performance, his injury risk, or anything that's going to benefit him whatsoever.
No, it's crazy. But unfortunately, in the industry, especially cricket, it's still done where fitness testing and looking at how quick you run, yo-yo score, different things like that, and then bang, straight into and you like.
Yeah, we're always measuring capacity. That's all we're doing. Let's just measure quantity, volume, reps, whatever we're going to do. We're just going to measure that, and then we're going to assume everything is all right. We're not going to ask you how you got to that end result. We're just going to assume that you're fine, and then when you break down, we'll hit the physio. We'll reverse engineer it back and try and figure out what the problem was.
So when we take the FMS on, this is the Y balance test, and it's something you could almost set up yourselves using sliders and different things like that. But Gav, do you just want to talk through what they're doing here?
Yeah. The Y balance is from the Star Excursion test. It's been around for a long time in America, and basically the Star Excursion test, I think it comprised of something ridiculous like 80 different reach directions. They took the data from that, Phil Plisky, and brought it in, and basically he engineered this. And and he took the most valuable reach directions, lower and upper quarter, and effectively what it does is it splits the body in half and it cauterizes it left and right.
My
And
God.
this is an injury predictor effectively. But you know, when we're all playing these asymmetrical sports and we're all involved from going from cricket to next term playing hockey and next term maybe tennis and so on, it just this assesses the level of imbalance that you have in your body. It's a fantastic tool for measuring motor control. It's a great tool for return to play. So when people are injured, let's try and make sure that we've got you back to a certain level before you move on. It gives me a lot of data with cricketers, without any shadow of a doubt.
It's a little beauty, that one. And so here we're just sort of showing a picture of what it's like when you get dysfunction, but you actually come back from it. And so we've got two different players here. We've got a senior batter and then a junior bowler. And you can see with both of them how they got a lordosis, and that's what the sort of S in the spine is. And then we're getting them back. And it's once, like we just spoke about loading left to right, and you can feel if your right side's giving you more, your left side. Look at this spine in these pictures. That is not a healthy spine. And if you're going to load that, then we're asking for trouble. You know, anyone can see just looking at it, that's not right.
Yeah. I mean, the frightening thing is whether you physiotherapist, osteopath, or strength coach, the whole mandate to our profession is first do no harm. I think there are probably a few coaches out there that need to take that one to heart a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean,
Hence the reason.
the whole message is let's get it right and then build the athlete. Because we're not saying don't do any strength and don't touch strength, because strength is going to be great. But first, let's make sure, like you say, we're not going to harm them. Because there's no point in them being injured or not being able to do anything. But once we get them back, load them, brilliant. But do it smartly. That's the whole crux of the matter, really. And again, it's just don't rush past it. You know, even the guys on the Build a Fast Bowler who have had their first stage of program, or the guys on the inner circle with the dysfunction period, most of the messages I've had, I'd say probably 90%, are people saying, can I add this? Can I add this? Can I add this? Can I start doing strength? Can I start doing something else? Can I bowl? No, just chill. Okay, chill. Let the body relax. Get on the dysfunction protocols. Get on your stuff, the FMS interventions which you've been given, and just do them. Just relax. Get them done.
I think
That's right, and everything else can almost like drop into place.
Yeah, I think that's an important point to get over here, just because, you know, it's the same analogy as the tortoise and the hare. You know, at the end of the day, who won that? Now, just because we're going slow on the front doesn't mean that we're not going to be kicking on the back nine. And that's the analogy here, guys, that corrective intervention work is conditioning. That's what it is. So a lot of people are so indoctrinated into the mindset of, I must lift this. Well, 2 weeks, 10 days of the corrective work, and then you go back and hit your strength work and you see it's gone through the roof. You suddenly realize that taking the time with these small details is where the next level of performance comes from. If you ever want to see some of the best athletes that are actively measured on this planet, go and have a look at the NFL Combine. Go and watch guys that weigh in at 300 pounds that are doing the 40-meter sprint and vertical jump in frightening numbers. It'll put some perspective out there. But you know what? The FMS, we are out there at the Combine, and we're assessing movement competency. And if your movement's not up to scratch, you don't get drafted. So let's just, this is a process to say, look, what is the minimum level of movement quality that you need before you can safely load yourself? Because if you don't take movement off the table, it will undermine all your strength work. Forget the injury side of it. This goes back to this inhibition in the nervous system. You know, if you bring dysfunction to the weight room, the brain will be just doing the best it can to get you out of there. So it's not rocket science here, really.
No, it's not. And just almost take the hit of a month of maybe not doing some biceps and stuff, and think, like Gav just said, later on down the line, it'll come back in spades, because you can actually build muscle a hell of a lot easier when the body's moving right. It honestly is so much easier. I heard I think it was Gray Cook talk about the bodybuilders back in the 60s and 70s before the all the isolation machines came in, and said the way they built muscle was just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. Obviously, it's changed now with all the drugs and everything, but they built it so quick back then compared to now. So
Yeah, I mean,
just
people that exercised 50 years ago in our culture were fit and they were healthy.
hmm,
That's the big today is that exercise now has been labelled a health risk in America. So
hmm.
these people are fitter, but they're popping ibuprofen to get through the next run. So they are now creating now a GI problem, which is going to be a gut issue because they're now popping pharmaceutical pills to get them through what they're doing. So it's madness, really. The amount of for exercise to be labelled a health risk is, it's beyond me, really.
It is crazy. Right, let's just look at a couple of the exercises that we quite like. Half kneeling. Oh, it's gone. Let's go back. Oh, it's all kicking off here. Half kneeling for me is a big one. I love a lot of stuff half kneeling. We got the kettlebell here. Now the kettlebell upturned is such a good neural reprogramming one. I absolutely love it, and this is one of the easiest ways to find out left to right have you got an issue. One side will always struggle with this. I know Gav's found that as well.
Yeah, yeah, massively. I mean, half of the corrective stuff that we use is a screen in itself. There's nothing better if you're trying to get people to understand what's going on with their body. You cut the body in half and you ask them to do something, and they look at you and go, "Why can't I do that?"
Hmm.
That will then be traced back to their screen and their assessments, but also their corrective programming. So
Like
yeah, anything that you
with that one, it's a 10k kettlebell, and once you've got it upside down, you will not believe how tough it can be left to right. I know for me, in the left to right pattern, absolutely horrendous, horrendous. I look forward to that less than I used to look forward to actually deadlifting heavy. It was just, it would seem to fry my CNS system because it's just trying to learn, and everything seems to be working. But then the feedback is eventually when you can balance that kettlebell upside down, okay, things are improving it. The feedback's that quick. It's like kids when they're learning to walk, they've got a negative feedback loop because if they don't get it right, they fall over and hurt themselves. So they think, okay, well, that didn't work. Next time they'll try and do it a little bit different. And everything can be taken back to that sort of primal pattern of when we started to actually learn to move. We didn't have coaches over us saying, right, you got to put left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. We just discovered for ourselves. And we almost want to try and go back to that. So the bear crawl, I know Gav's a big fan of this one.
Yeah. I mean, again, a lot of the system that we use in place is all based on the neurodevelopmental sequence, so how babies learn to move. Um, they'll go through rolling patterns, prone on elbows, crawling patterns, transitional postures, etc. And we actually learn to squat from the ground upwards. The only reason why I think we squat down is because it's less complicated and we can't mess it up so much. But anyway, the point is that when we reload movement, that there is a certain part that none of this is random. When we try and recalibrate or reset movement, we go through those neurodevelopmental sequences. So we'll take somebody from the floor back up through these postures until you hit gate. That's the idea. So sometimes you got to realize you've got to regress to progress. And there's nothing better than stripping somebody, putting someone on the ground, taking away all their prime movers, and let's have a look at what you've got. And I can tell you now that one of the biggest drills that I personally use for screening, but also for a return to play policy, are Turkish get-ups. If people aren't sure of them, go and have a look. And it's quite humbling to see a guy that could bench 120 kilos that can't do a get-up equally on each side with something like 10 kilos, can't even get off the ground. So it gives us so much feedback. You see, movement's coordination and timing, stability is motor control. These things are all sequences of movement. And that's why taking somebody back down to where it all started on the ground and building them back through the sequences until they get back on 2 feet, then we can see some real transference, some real clean movement, and some important improvements on all of our capacity testing at the end. It's important.
Yeah, and then we move on to sort of mobility and stability. Once we've cleaned up the movements, we can see actually where the issues are. And so the thing with the dysfunction is getting on top of things and not going to something and just pulling it with a band. there is a time and a place to do that. Sort of, if you're on a tight time period and you're just trying to get out of pain. But long term, we want sort of mobility and stability to come after we've corrected the movements.
Yeah, I think it's massively important for people to understand that the brain does not like mobility. Mobility is vulnerability. The brain doesn't want it, so you've got to earn it. You've got to prove to the brain that you can actually not only have this new range, but you can live in it without causing you problems. That's why there, in my opinion, there's no such thing as just mobility training. Mobility training without stability is a problem. So you have to have if you have a mobility issue, you have to have your normal resets. That could be foam rolling, soft tissue ball work. But then we've got to move on to static and dynamic stability. So we've got to basically be able to prove to the brain, okay, we've got you some new range. You're not going to die there. You can survive there, and you can generate force there. Yeah. So there is a process to this. It's not just randomized moving on things, pulling on stuff. And that's why it worries me now. Most mobility or most training that I see, even in elite level sport, is T-spine and hip mobility. That's all I see.
I mean, once you get it all right, the process before even touching your action is massive. We had one player put on 5 mile an hour just from doing the dysfunctions and then hitting the mobility and stability after that. So get it right, and the rewards are massive, really. So again, this is such an important part. All the fun stuff, the strength and the chucking stuff around, the power, it comes later on. Get this right, and the rewards your oyster, because the good thing is no one's doing it. No one's spending the time to cleaning up their movements, getting things moving right, and building from a solid foundation. Most people are jumping to the end, saying, right, I've seen these nice, sexy drills, I want to start doing them. You're not ready. Once you're ready, crack on. Until then, get this work done. I say it will help you bowling massively. So then just see something like this that we just pop in literally pre-workout and pre-game. Thoracic, hips. And why is it important? Look at this picture of one of our young fast bowlers. Do you think if he didn't have sufficient thoracic mobility, he'd be able to get in that position? No. Okay. So we like to sort of actually show you exactly why you need it. And that's a good example. That young lad was bowling 90 plus in that game. So that's why. In almost to leave you with things, this is just sort of comparing movements from pass to fail almost, or good to bad. So if you look on the left, if you like that, problems. Look on the right, not a problem. Left, fine. Right, not great. Hip hinge on the left, we don't want that. See there's sort of flexion in his lumbar. On the right, good hip hinge. Okay, so that's almost what we want to leave you with, so you can have a look and understand yourself almost where you are on the continuum. Do you have any last thoughts there?
No. Just the only thing I would say is that back to that very first question, what is dysfunction? Dysfunction is something that's going to undermine your work in the gym, and it's going to undermine your technical work with your bowling action as well. That's what it's going to do to you. Simple as that.
Yeah, great stuff. Okay, any of you guys on? If you got any questions, hit them over to us now, and we'll answer them. And if not, we'll just finish there. So, have you got any questions for me or Gav? Doesn't look like it. Okay, so we're going to hold it there. Thanks for joining us. And as ever, any questions, get us over an email, and we'll get back to you. Okay, we got Ollie. He's saying he's been going to a boxing class once a week. Yeah, mate, just for a month, just leave it. Okay, just leave it. Come back to it later if you feel you need it, but just clean up the body, and then we can really attack it. Okay, good stuff. Okay, well, thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you soon. Ta-da.